I'll tell you another story from when I was a little boy. I don't know if these stories are interesting or not, but I'll tell them anyway, and people can watch them or not. It's up to them, really. Um, I already told all you guys about how I was used as a guinea pig for drug experiments when I was 8 years old in Toronto. Um, that experience really put me in a bad situation because it robbed me of my strength. And when you were a little boy in 1976, that wasn't a good thing. I was 8 years old when this happened. They ran a lot of different drugs through my system. Some of those drugs gave me seizures. Um, some of them made me hallucinate. Some of them, one drug in particular called haloperidol actually paralyzed me. Literally put me in a wheelchair temporarily. And yeah, it was pretty bad anyway. And they also gave me LSD, and they made films of me climbing upstairs and all kinds of stuff like that. They put me in a booth and they asked me questions that I should have known the answer to, like my name. I didn't know who I was, and that was, but I knew I should know who I was. That's the weird thing about that, is that you're with it enough that you know you're not with it when you're on that stuff. But I remember that they gave me a glass of water one morning and they told me I had to drink it. It was a great big glass of water and I had trouble getting it all down, and it had a bitter taste to it. I found out later that it was LSD, and there are some black and white films somewhere of me, and I know they're black and white because I watched them. They actually allowed me to watch them. They told me I was famous and they let me watch these films. Anyway, that's what happened in there, and when I came out I was weak as a kitten, and I had to go back to my school in my hometown. And like I told you before, kids had to fight. That's just how it was. Boys especially, we had to fight. Not so much girls, but girls had their own things going on. But boys, we tended to fight, and you established a pecking order that way. I never liked it. I always thought it was really stupid, but still, it was what it was, and I'd fight if I had to. I told you in my story before about how my refusal, well, how I didn't fit in. I'm going to tell you what actually happened there, the moment when things got bad for me. And it had to do with a game that the older kids used to play, and they kind of victimized us younger kids, the younger guys in the schoolyard there in the back field. We used to call it the back field because it was literally a field behind the school in those days. There was nothing there but rocks and trees and long grass. But what would happen is the older kids, this is back when I was in grade 1, so back in like 1974 when I was 6, the older kids used to get a hold of us younger kids. A couple older guys, that might have been 10 or 11, 12 years old, would get a hold of a 6-year-old, one on each side of him, and they'd hold him back. They'd pin his arms and his legs, and then they'd yell, "Free punches." And boys would line up in front of you, and each boy would step up to you and they'd hit you in the stomach. Double you right over, then the two that were holding on to you would heft you back up and the next one would hit you. And I didn't like that. I'd never get in line to do that. I always thought it was terrible. I'd never do it. And there were a bunch of us that wouldn't do it, but there's always some that they don't care, they'll do whatever. Anyway, what had happened was, one day they got a hold of me, and I had to be the victim. I had no choice. They had me, and I was gonna get punched repeatedly, and that's all there was to it. So they got me, hold of me, one on each side of me there, and they pinned my arms and my legs so that I was unable to do anything. And one after another come up and hit me. Hit me in the stomach. And they had rules. That's the funny thing, as reprehensible as this situation was, they had rules. You couldn't hit the guy in the face, and you couldn't hit him below the belt. You had to hit him in the stomach. That was the rule. And this one boy came up in front of me there, and he reared back and he punched me in the face. Bloodied my nose. So they let me go. And another one of their rules was, if one of the people hitting you broke the rules, you got let go, they got grabbed up in your place, and you had to hit them. You got the first crack at them. So that's what happened. They let me go. Of course, I was bleeding all down the front of my shirt and everything, it opened my nose up pretty good. And they got a hold of this guy then, and they said, okay, now you hit him. I said, no, I'm not going to hit him when you're holding him back. I said, let him go and I'll fight him. They said, that's not how this game is played. I said, I don't care. I'm not going to do it. Let him go and I'll fight him, but I'm not going to lay a hand on him when you're holding him back like that and he can't do anything. Well, they didn't like that anyway, and they kept insisting that I hit him, and I wouldn't. They wouldn't let him go so I could fight him. And so we were at a bit of an impasse, I guess. Of course, I was going to be on the losing end of that. There was no way I was going to win, Well, they let that guy go then, and they grabbed me up, and they gave him the first crack at me, seeing as how I hadn't followed the rules. So he landed me a good one in the stomach that time anyway, and got hit a few more times before I got let go finally. And after that, I was a bit of an outcast. I guess the act of not going along, I got branded. I guess that's what it was anyway. So that's how I ended up ultimately being used as a guinea pig. There was a whole series of steps prior to that, but that's kind of how it ended up. Now, when I got out of the hospital, I was weak. I couldn't speak. I had no control over my bodily functions. Didn't know when I needed the toilet. And so I was getting picked on pretty bad, as you could imagine. Plus, there were boys that I had beat in fights, and they saw an opportunity for a rematch. And even though I didn't like fighting, I was good at it, and I could fight if I had to, and I had won some fights. I won't say I won them all, because that'd be a lie. I got beaten plenty of times, but I also won my share. And so I was somewhere in the middle in the pecking order before all this happened. But, these ones that I had beat, they saw the chance to raise their status, and maybe to get a little revenge or whatever, I don't know, but... So I was getting my clock cleaned every day. They were just beating me bad, just whooping the tar out of me every day, and I was coming in from recess with my face all pounded in, and my clothes torn, and bruises all over me, and hobbling, They took one time, they tied me to the fence and stuff. I had to get out of that to go back in, and then I was late, and, it just went on like that. So, anyway, the custodian at our school was a man by the name of Tom Kerr. We had two custodians. We had Tom Kerr, and we had Ed Muldoon. And then Ed Muldoon, he went to another school, and then we had a fellow by the name of Ken O'Neill. All really good guys anyway, but Tom Kerr was actually a distant cousin of mine. My grandmother on my dad's side had been a Kerr. Her maiden name was Kerr. And I was Tom's father and my grandmother's father, so my great-grandfather on that side were brothers. That's what it was. So, Tom was in his 40s then. I was 8. Tom took me under his wing. Tom actually went to the principal, and he said to her, his principal was a lady by the name of Sister Loretta McAndrews. It was a Catholic school. He went to her and he said, oh, they're going to kill him. You got to get him off the schoolyard. They're going to kill him. You're hurting him real bad. He said, let me take him, and I'll get him to help me with my chores in here or whatever at recess and at lunchtime, so that he'll be safe, because he's in no condition to be out there, with those people, with those guys. So that's what happened. I'd come in at noontime. I'd stay in at noontime and at recess time, and I'd go around empty garbage cans and things like that with Tom Kerr. And then he started taking me out to his woodlot on the weekends. He had a woodlot out in the country, and I'd help him pile firewood and everything. He'd pay me a couple of dollars for the day's work, which in 1976, 77 was a lot of money. 1977 really, by that time, was a lot of money for a 9-year-old. And, I'd do that. He'd pick me up like at 4 or 5 in the morning. We'd go over to his house. His wife, Helen, would cook me a big breakfast, and she'd pack me a lunch, and we always had a big flask of coffee. And I drink coffee out there. I remember I got sick a few times because I drank so much coffee I made myself sick. But anyway, we pile wood all day. We worked hard. That was hard work. But what happened is it helped me get some of my strength back. And I think it even helped me sweat some of the poison out of me and stuff. I'm sure I was poisoned, really. So it was a good thing anyway. And it made me feel better about myself too, because I was doing something useful. And I was doing kind of a manly thing. And I had been kind of dejected over the fact that I was no longer able to defend myself. So it was kind of nice to be out there doing that kind of work anyway, and I really appreciate the fact that that man did that for me. And then as I grew up, there were times I needed advice about things. I'd go see Tom. Whenever I needed to borrow a vehicle, if I didn't have a vehicle of my own, I'd go see Tom. He'd lend me the car or the truck. He had a car and a truck, and he'd lend me whatever I needed. I borrowed money from him different times, always paid him back, but I borrowed money different times from him. And like I say, he was just really good to me anyway. And he actually passed away just last year at 89 years of age. And that's quite a thing, He was born in 1932. So, like I say, I just wanted to tell that story. There's another story of a person who was good to me in the midst of a lot of problems. And, I'm very appreciative of the fact that he was as good to me as he was. It meant an awful lot to me, and it still does. So, there's another story for you anyway. I hope you enjoyed it. I kind of enjoyed telling it, although it's kind of hard to tell these stories sometimes too because of the emotion involved in them. But still, I'm glad to share these things with people. For a long time I wasn't, but I'm getting past that, and I'm learning to share these things. I realize life don't go on forever. As I get older, I realize that. And there's some stories I want to die with me. There's some stories I'll never tell because I just don't want, I want them to be gone when I'm gone. But there are other stories that I can tell, and there's a positive side to them. And that's what I'm trying to do here. Anyway, thank you all for listening to me. Talk later.